Hello again. This is the first video in a four-part series on four-part harmony. See what I did there? In these four videos, we're going to cover why I think four-part chorale harmonization is a vital skill for any orchestral composer. We'll talk about how to actually write a four-part harmonization. We'll go through an example together, start to finish. And then we'll also discuss how you can take that four-part harmony and turn it into a full orchestral excerpt. So why learn four-part harmonization? Well, the simple answer is that four-part harmony is the foundation of orchestration. Now, you may be saying, well, I'm not writing chorales or fugues, right? Why should I learn chorale harmonization? Well, in this video, I will show you several examples from the classical literature, from well-known film scores, and from not very well-known game music, because it's my own. In each case, we'll show how the music derives from four or sometimes five parts harmony. In all of these examples, I'm going to be using finale and note performer. But you can achieve the same results using Sibelius or Dorico or whatever other program you use that has decent playback, including the free Muse score and Muse sounds. Now, one great book that covers both counterpoint, species counterpoint, and how it's used in real compositions is this one right here. Counterpoint in Composition by Salzer and Schachter. And actually the first example I'm going to show you comes straight from that book. Our first example is a familiar Beethoven piano sonata. You may have heard this or even played it before, so first I'll just show you how this goes. Now, I can already hear you saying, this isn't four-part harmony. It's obviously at most three-part and usually two-part harmony. But actually, that's not quite true. These arpeggiated chords are really just a decoration of chords, right? So if we compress these arpeggios down into just chords, and we take out the ornamentation like the trills here and the chromatic runs, and these little grace notes here, and here there's an accented chromatic passing note, you'll see that in fact the structure is much simpler. So if we take out all that ornamentation, really the core structure of the melody looks just like this. Okay, so as you can see in this compressed version, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parts. So I'll play you how this goes. So with all due apologies to Beethoven, this is what Mozart or Haydn might have done with this as a string quartet. As you can see, it's really the same melodic material. It's the same harmonization. It's just arranged for a string quartet instead of for piano. Okay, so I hear what you're saying. Piano pieces and string quartets, that's easy to do four-part harmony. I want to write full orchestral music. Okay, well, here's an example from Mahler's Sixth Symphony. Now, in this example, there are actually 15 different instruments playing in the winds and brass. I will say the string pizzicato here isn't really part of the four-part harmony. It's just sort of a compression of earlier melodic content and fragmentation of earlier melodic content. So I'm not going to consider that as being part of the four-part harmony. But all the rest of this stuff is absolutely part of that. So you may say, hang on, this is 15 instruments playing. How is this four-part harmony? So if you compress all this onto two staves, what you'll actually get is this. Again, I've left out the string pizzicato because it's not really part of the four-part counterpoint. As you can see, this is exactly the same music. It's clearly four-part harmony. I don't have any notes here that aren't in the original, and I don't think the original music has any notes that are not represented here. I've just stuck it on four staves. Now, one thing that can be very instructive is to see how Mahler has taken this four-part harmony and orchestrated it. So for example, if we look at the beginning, the first phrase, right, this is in two phrases, this phrase, and then this phrase. In the first phrase, the melody is played by flutes and oboes, or the first oboe. And in the second phrase, it's played by flutes and the first clarinet. Also in the first phrase, the bass, the lower part is doubled by horn instead of just bassoons. So all of that contributes to a slightly different texture in the second half than in the first half. And then, of course, in this last couple of bars, we have the English horn coming in and some muted horns, and then the melody is picked up by the oboe to really give it that nasal kind of accent. Okay, let's look at one more excerpt from Mahler. In fact, this comes right after the passage that I just showed you in Mahler 6. This is the very next passage. Okay, here it is. Now, this is really small, admittedly, so let me expand it and show you a bit better what's going on. So we have four flutes playing the melody, well, two flutes at least. We have a whole bunch of 16th notes going on here in the oboes and English horn, and in the second violins, we'll see later. We have an English horn and bass clarinet and bassoons, and actually some horns and trombones playing a bunch of accompaniments. We have a counter melody played by the oboes and clarinets. And then we have a bit of percussion, the harp doing whatever it is the harp is doing. And then we have the first and second violin. Well, the first violin playing the theme. Second violin's playing a bunch of 16th notes and stuff. Viola's playing a bunch of 16th notes. Double basses pitching. So all kinds of stuff going on. Okay, so let's hear what this sounds like. And then the melody repeats after that. Now, I hear you saying, this can't possibly be four-part harmony. And actually, you're right, it's not. It's five-part harmony. Now, I'm going to show you the condensed version, the reduction, you might say. But before I do that, let me just show you what I've left out. Okay, so I have left out all these 16th notes because while they're a really interesting line, they're actually not really a part of the 4 or 5 part harmony. They're just sort of decoration that serve to add a bit of interest and motion to the music. And actually, they're very interesting. If you look at this, for example, it's bum 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 bum. So it's actually a compression of the main melody here, or well, this main melody right here, actually. So it's very skillfully put together, but it's not part of the core harmony. It's just decoration that he added on top of it. So let's look at what the 5-part harmony looks like with those 16th notes taken out. So this is it. All of the music that was in the score is present in these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 voices. Now, that doesn't include octave doublings, right? There's some, for example, maybe the contrabassoons or the basses are playing this note an octave lower. But basically, this is exactly the same music. I'll play this for you and you can see how this goes. So once again, it's instructive to see how Mahler took this 5-part harmony and turned it into a full excerpt of a symphony. I'm not going to step through that right now, but I would encourage you to do this. You can get the score to Mahler's 6th freely from imslp.org online. And that's what I did and transcribed it into this notation program. All right, so for my next excerpt, I literally just thought of the first symphony that came to mind. Not even thinking about 4-part harmony. I was just thinking, what's another symphony I can show? Actually, the first one that came to mind was Beethoven's 9th, but seeing as that actually has a chorale in it, I thought that was maybe too much of a softball. So I thought of another one. Well, so this is an excerpt from Saint-Saëns' Organ Symphony, Symphony No. 3. So first we'll take a look at the score. So this is scored for standard orchestra. We've got 3 flutes. We've only got 1 oboe playing right now, but there are 2 oboes in the orchestra plus English horn, 2 clarinets plus bass clarinet, 2 bassoons plus contra. He's got 4 horns in the orchestra, but only 2 of them are playing during this excerpt, and then your standard complement of strings. Of course, there's also trumpets and trombones and stuff, but they're not in this excerpt. Okay, so if you look at this excerpt, you'll see all of the winds playing various different lines here. It looks like, again, quite a lot of different parts are playing, but really we'll see that it all compresses down into 4-part harmony. So first, let's see what this sounds like. So once again, what the strings are doing here, these 16th notes, is it's really more just decoration, and it's helping to tie the music that came before this into this section and provide a little bit of motion. Now here, at this bar, you'll see that the strings are the only thing that's playing, and they've gone from to actually playing the melody. So this is no longer decoration. This is now taking over the main melodic function. So let's see how all of this compresses into 4-part harmony. So once again, this is exactly the same music. It's just been compressed onto 4 staves, and I've taken out all the octave doublings. And once again, it's instructive to see how Camille Saint-Saëns took this four-part harmony and then turned it into a fully orchestrated symphony. So if we look at these two side by side, you'll see that the melody here is played by the first flute and the English horn. The second line is played by the second flute and the first clarinet. The third line is played by the third flute and then an octave down by the second clarinet. And the bottom line is played by the bass clarinet and the contrabassoon. And then to accent a few key moments here, he brings in both bassoons playing here. And then later on, he brings in the third and fourth horns at the very close of this passage. So I think a lot of the folks that are watching my channel aspire to be film composers. And one of the scores that is often studied by film composer students is The Planets by Holst. So my next example is sort of bridging that gap between the classical and the film worlds. And I've got a segment of Jupiter from The Planets, which should be very familiar. So let's see how this sounds. And then, of course, the melody repeats with a slightly fuller orchestration, and then it repeats once again. So this, again, is straight four-part harmony. I will show you the four-part reduction, and we'll see how this sounds. Now, this is fairly standard for the most part. Holst does break a couple of, counterpoint rules in a couple places, but he does those for effect. So, for example, they're parallels, right? These first two chords are broadly parallel. And also here, he accentuates the third, right? He doubles the third, triples, in fact, the third of the chord, which is E flat in this C minor chord. But that's because he's leading right back into E flat minor. He really wants to hold that E flat and accentuate it. So again, there are reasons why he breaks some of the rules that we'll be talking about. And once you understand what the rules are and you can follow them, then like Holst, you can learn to break the rules as well. Okay. So our first example from film music is Hogwarts Forever by John Williams. This is textbook four-part harmony. It really is, in fact, it's scored for four horns, And then later on in the track, he adds some additional orchestration, but it really starts out as four horns. And this is not classical four-part harmony, but this is classic four-part harmony. He follows all the normal counterpoint rules, and it's very effective. So let's see what this sounds like. All right. Now, I didn't bother writing a four-part reduction of this because this already is four parts. Now, you may say, well, that's all good and well, right? John Williams is almost a classical composer, right? In fact, he is a classical composer at times. He has written many classical works that are performed in concert halls. What about, other film composers, right, that may not have such a classical background? Well, I've got a couple of examples here from Lord of the Rings by Howard Shore, which some people consider to be one of the greatest film scores of all time. Now, I actually transcribed these from a recording. I haven't seen the score. Well, actually, I did see the score, or I did see a score to the Shire theme, but it didn't match what I was hearing. So I actually just transcribed both of these from a recording. So if I got a few notes wrong here and there, please don't be too hard on me. So here is the Shire theme. Now I have to apologize. Unfortunately, that was not a very musical rendition of this, and finale and no performer do not get along very well when it comes to the glissandi. So unfortunately, some of these slides weren't quite right, but you get the general idea. Now, you can probably tell that this, again, is four-part harmony, right? There's 1, 2, 3. Actually, this is five-part harmony. There's the melody, and then there's 1, 2, 3, 4 parts under that. There's also these eighth notes. I don't consider that to be part of the four-part harmony because it's just adding a little texture and motion to the music. So let's see what the condensed version looks like. Now, in this version, I actually simplified some of the rhythms a little bit, and I left out some of the grace notes, kind of like what I did with the Beethoven. I could have simplified this much more. Bum, 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 bum is really the structure of the theme, but I decided to leave the rhythms mostly the way they were in the original. So let's see what this sounds like. So as you can see, Shore actually transcribed this in a very straightforward way into an orchestration. He gave the top line to the first violins, the second violin played the second line, viola, and double basses with the cellos playing a little bit of, those eighth notes again. The next example is also from Lord of the Rings. This is the Fellowship theme. Now this one has a bit of a fuller orchestration, mostly brass and strings. And so let's see what that sounds like. Again, I transcribed this directly from a recording, so I may have gotten a few of the notes wrong, and the harmony may be distributed amongst the trombones and the horns a little bit differently than how I did, but it's something like this, at least. It sounded pretty close to the recording when I play it back. Now again, this may not seem like four-part harmony, but it is. So as you can see, the strings are playing in unison, and this is just a little background motif to make the accompaniment texture a little more interesting. So I don't consider this to be part of the four-part harmony. The brass and double basses are playing really the four-part harmony. So let's see what that looks like. Okay. Here, so this is actually five-part harmony. As you can see, the melody plus 1, 2, 3, 4 accompaniment parts. So let's see what this sounds like when condensed. Okay, again, this follows pretty standard counterpoint rules. And, it's instructive, as always, to see how he took this theme and orchestrated it to produce the character he did. The bass line is in the tuba, the timpani, which is rolling all the notes, almost all the notes, and the double bass as well. Then the melody is in the trumpets, and only the trumpets, and then the trombones and horns split the inner voices. Now, the other thing is that he's using the strings to just echo these chords. If you look at the notes their strings are playing, they're just an arpeggiated version of these chords, just like in the Beethoven example we looked at earlier. Finally, we're going to look at a little bit of game music, and this is music that I have written for Captain Disaster and the Two Worlds of Riscara. Now, the reason we're looking at my music is not because it's so great. I mean, hopefully it's okay, but it's more that I knew exactly what was going on in my head when I wrote it, so I can speak fairly authoritatively about it, whereas I kind of have to guess with some other games and some other composers. So this first example is from the Journey to the Volcano track, and it's very straightforward five-part harmony put right into the horns and tuba. So let's see how this sounds. Okay, so the only thing that's going on in this segment, other than the horns and tubas, is these cello arpeggios, which again, they're there simply for a more interesting background texture, to provide a little bit of motion. So that's pretty straightforward. You can see, again, this is just four horns and tuba playing kind of a nice horn chorale there. Now here is another section of the same track, which uses, again, really pretty standard 4/5-part harmony. Actually, I think it is 5-part harmony in this case, but with a bit of a fuller orchestration. So this uses primarily brass and strings, with timpani as well, providing a nice constant beat. It also has the piccolo come in here and there just to accent a few key phrases. So let's see what this sounds like. And finally, I'll show you the prison ship track from the same soundtrack, which uses, well, 6-part harmony, 4-part harmony, and so forth, in a bit of a different character, just to sort of show you a different example. Okay, so here we actually have the pedal in the bass, which is a B throughout this entire section. I don't know if you'd consider that a voice or not. I kind of do, actually, because all the other chords do have to at least blend with it somewhat. And then otherwise we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parts plus this pedal here. And then right here we have the clarinets playing the melody with horns 1 and 2. Providing the background texture with this viola tremolo as the pedal in the bass. So we have a 6-part harmony going to a simpler 4-part harmony here. And then the whole track is very similar to this. We have 4, 5, 6-part harmony throughout this entire thing. So hopefully from these several examples from classical music, film music, and game music, you're able to see that regardless of what medium you're composing for, really 4-part or 5-part counterpoint is really an essential skill in any composer's tool belt. So in my next video, we're going to be looking at the process for how to write your own 4-part counterpoint, specifically following Bach counterpoint rules. And that's because Bach was widely considered to be a sort of a master at this stuff, really. And once you understand how Bach approached it, you can easily extend it to other more modern styles of harmony. So if you don't want to miss that, then make sure you subscribe to this channel. And also, if you like this video, please put a like on YouTube to help other people find it and to help this channel grow. Until next time, have a good one.